Discrimination in plain sight is one of the most painful realities of our world, because it often does not hide behind closed doors or whispered conversations. It happens openly, in spaces where people should feel safe, respected, and valued. Imagine stepping onto an airplane, holding a ticket that clearly states your seat, a VIP seat that you rightfully deserve and paid for, only to be told that you must give it up. Not because of any mistake, not because of any real reason, but because of how you look. The sting of such a moment does not come just from being moved, it comes from the silent assumption that you do not belong in that space. It is in these moments that discrimination shows its true face, not subtle, not hidden, but loud enough for everyone to see, and yet still allowed to happen. When a black man was forced out of his VIP seat, every passenger watching understood what had taken place. Some might have pretended not to see, some might have quietly sympathized, but the reality was undeniable. He was judged not by his identity, his achievements, or his worth, but by the color of his skin. That is the tragedy of discrimination in plain sight. It strips away the humanity of the person targeted and replaces it with assumptions. It says, without words, that you do not belong, that someone else is more deserving, even if they have done nothing to earn it. The cruelty of such discrimination lies in its casualness. To the airline staff, it may have been a small decision, a routine instruction, or even an order delivered without much thought. To them, perhaps it was just a matter of moving a passenger. But to the man on the receiving end, it was an insult layered with centuries of history. It was a reminder of a world that has too often tried to confine people of color to lesser spaces, even when they have worked hard, succeeded, and earned their place at the very top. For him, that one command to stand up and move was not just about a seat, it was about dignity, value, and respect. What makes discrimination in plain sight so destructive is that it does not just harm the individual directly involved. It sends a message to everyone watching. Other passengers may have looked on in silence, but deep down they too absorbed a lesson. They saw that skin color could override fairness. They saw that power could be misused to strip someone of what they rightfully owned. They saw that injustice could be performed in public, without hesitation. For some, it reinforced their fears. For others, it exposed their own hidden prejudices. For all, it was a moment that carried weight. This form of discrimination is not always born out of hatred. Sometimes it grows out of ignorance, bias, or deeply ingrained stereotypes. But ignorance does not excuse its harm. The man was not seen as an investor, not recognized as someone who held enormous power within the airline itself. He was seen only as a black man occupying a seat that, in the eyes of the airline staff, must have belonged to someone else more appropriate. And in that judgment, an entire system of prejudice was revealed. For the man himself, the moment must have been heavy with irony. He was the airline's biggest investor, someone who had poured resources, trust, and vision into the very company now treating him as if he were undeserving of the privileges he had more than earned. This is what discrimination does: it blinds people to truth, it strips away context, and it makes them act unjustly even against those who hold power within their own institutions. The silence of the crowd also becomes part of the story. Passengers saw what happened. They saw a man shamed, forced to move, treated as if he were out of place. But most did not intervene. That silence is one of the saddest companions of discrimination. It gives permission for injustice to continue. It says, quietly but firmly, that the world will not stop such acts unless someone is directly affected. The pain of discrimination is magnified not only by the act itself but by the indifference of those who watch it unfold. In moments like these, the weight of history presses down. The man's experience is not isolated, it echoes generations of people who were told where they could and could not sit, who was worthy and who was not, who belonged and who did not. It is the same pattern replayed in a modern setting, with different uniforms and different rules, but the same underlying prejudice. The seat was not just a piece of furniture. It was a symbol of status, respect, and equality. To be removed from it was not about comfort. It was about erasure. Power hidden behind humility is a truth often overlooked in a world that measures people by their appearance, their titles, or the obvious signs of wealth they display. Many times, the most influential individuals walk among us without revealing the extent of their authority or success. They do not carry themselves with arrogance or demand recognition at every turn. Instead, they allow their character to speak louder than their possessions or their status. This quiet strength becomes a double-edged sword. It shields them from the vanity of the world but also exposes them to the unfair assumptions that others may place upon them. In the story of the black man forced out of his VIP seat, his humility became both his dignity and his disguise. No one on that flight knew that he was the airline's biggest investor, a man whose decisions shaped the very future of the company. He did not announce it. He did not wear it on his sleeve. He simply boarded as any other passenger, confident in his right to the seat he had been assigned, never needing to prove himself to those around him. Yet this same humility meant that when others looked at him, they did not see influence or power. They saw only what their biases allowed them to see. And so, they mistook humility for insignificance. The greatest power is often exercised in silence. It is the ability to know your worth without needing constant validation from others. The man on that flight understood who he was and what he represented. He knew the financial weight he carried in the airline, and the immense authority his position granted him. But he also knew that true power does not need to announce itself. It does not need to shout or demand attention. True power can afford to remain humble, because it loses nothing in the eyes of those who fail to recognize it. This calm confidence is one of the most striking features of humility. It allows the powerful to walk among ordinary situations without needing the world to bow before them. However, this humility becomes a challenge when the world responds with ignorance or prejudice. The flight staff and passengers saw only a black man sitting in a VIP seat. Their assumptions told them he must not belong there. Their decision to force him out was not born from truth but from the blindness of their own expectations. They could not fathom that someone who looked like him could hold more power than anyone else on that plane. And so they acted unjustly, unaware that the person they dismissed so casually was in fact the very backbone of the company they worked for. Humility often disguises greatness. Some of the most powerful leaders in history have walked into rooms unnoticed, dressed simply, speaking gently, and carrying themselves without fanfare. Yet when the truth was revealed, the world was forced to reckon with the depth of their influence. This is the paradox of humility. It hides power until a moment arrives when power must reveal itself. And in that revelation, the arrogance of those who misjudged it becomes painfully clear. For the man on that flight, his quiet strength was both a shield and a test. He could have declared his position the moment he was challenged. He could have demanded respect on the grounds of his investment and influence. But humility kept him silent, at least for the moment. In doing so, he allowed the truth of others to reveal itself, the prejudice of the airline staff, the assumptions of the passengers, and the weakness of a system that judged worth based on appearances. His humility became a mirror, reflecting back the injustice around him. What makes humility so powerful is its ability to expose the character of others. When a humble person is treated with respect, it reveals fairness and decency in those around them. But when a humble person is mistreated, it exposes prejudice, cruelty, or arrogance. In either case, humility does not lose. It remains intact, unshaken, because it never relied on external validation to begin with. This is why power hidden behind humility is often underestimated but never diminished. The man's silence in that moment was not weakness. It was strength restrained, dignity unshaken, and wisdom waiting for the right time to act. Those who misjudged him thought they had authority over him. They believed they were in control of the situation. Yet true power remained with the man who did not need to prove himself to anyone in that instant. His humility gave him patience, and his patience allowed him to observe the unfolding injustice with clarity. When the moment came for his identity to be revealed, it would not just be a personal triumph, it would be a lesson to everyone present about the danger of judging others based on what they assume rather than what they know. Humility in the face of injustice is not about accepting mistreatment. It is about knowing when to act and how to act in a way that reveals truth rather than merely expressing anger. The man could endure humiliation not because he was powerless, but because he was powerful enough to let the truth speak for him at the right time. And in that balance between silence and revelation lies the extraordinary weight of power hidden behind humility. Public humiliation, private strength is a contrast that reveals the deepest truth about human character. When a person is embarrassed in front of strangers, stripped of dignity, and treated as if their worth is less than others, the natural response is anger or despair. Yet there are rare individuals who, when subjected to such humiliation, refuse to allow it to define them. They draw upon an inner strength that is invisible to those who cause the harm. This quiet resilience transforms what could have been a moment of defeat into a display of power, not outwardly aggressive, but inwardly unbreakable. On that flight, when the black man was told to leave his VIP seat, the humiliation was not private. It happened before a crowd of passengers. Each gaze became a witness to his embarrassment. Each silence from the bystanders added weight to the shame being forced upon him. The humiliation was designed to remind him that in their eyes, he was out of place, that his presence in that seat was not acceptable. Yet instead of responding with outrage, instead of fighting or shouting, he chose another path. He relied on his private strength, the strength rooted in self-knowledge, in the certainty of his true identity, and in the calm assurance of who he really was. Public humiliation can crush those who allow the opinions of others to define them. But it cannot touch someone who knows their worth beyond doubt. This man knew that no matter what the airline staff or the other passengers thought, his position in the world was unshakable. He was the airline's biggest investor, a man whose financial backing held more power than anyone realized. The humiliation he faced was real, but it was only surface deep. Inside, he carried a strength that came not from his wealth alone, but from his resilience, his discipline, and his refusal to let prejudice dictate his value. The strength to withstand humiliation in public comes from understanding that dignity is not something that can be taken away by others, it is something that lives within. They may strip away a seat, they may command you to move, they may even speak to you with disrespect, but they cannot erase the truth of who you are. This is the essence of private strength. It exists beyond the reach of humiliation. It is untouchable, no matter how harsh the circumstances. The man on that plane embodied this truth. His calmness under pressure was not weakness. It was a higher form of power, one that turned the act of humiliation into a stage where his resilience could shine. There is also a silent burden that comes with public humiliation. It forces a person to endure not only the injustice itself but the judgment of everyone watching. In that moment, each passenger was making silent conclusions. Some may have felt pity, others superiority, and some indifference. But the man carried all those silent judgments on his shoulders, not because they had power over him, but because they were part of the cruel stage he had been placed on. His private strength allowed him to endure this without lashing out, without giving those who humiliated him the satisfaction of breaking his spirit. What makes private strength remarkable is that it is not always visible to the world. To those watching, he may have appeared submissive, quietly complying with the order to leave his seat. They may have mistaken his calm for defeat. But private strength does not need to be loud to be real. It is measured in patience, in restraint, in the refusal to let others control your emotions. That kind of strength often goes unnoticed until the truth comes to light. And when the truth of who he was finally became known, it reframed the entire memory of his humiliation. What had seemed like weakness became proof of immense inner strength. Public humiliation often reveals more about the people delivering it than the person receiving it. In this case, the airline staff exposed their prejudice, their short-sightedness, and their inability to recognize true worth. They believed they were asserting authority, but in reality, they were displaying ignorance. The man's private strength turned their attempt at shaming him into a reflection of their own failure. His composure became a contrast to their injustice, his dignity a mirror exposing their lack of it. Strength in private does not mean ignoring pain. The man must have felt the sting of that moment, the weight of being judged unfairly, the injustice of being singled out because of skin color. But strength in private means carrying that pain without letting it control the response. It means using the hurt as fuel for wisdom rather than anger. It means holding your head high even when others try to push it down. In this way, private strength transforms humiliation into something temporary, while dignity remains permanent. Those who rely only on public recognition for their sense of worth collapse when humiliation strikes. But those who carry their strength within cannot be shaken by the judgment of strangers. The man's experience on that flight became an example of how resilience can outlast ridicule. While the world saw him being forced to leave his seat, he knew something they did not, that his true place, his real power, and his undeniable worth were far beyond the reach of those trying to belittle him. And it was this knowledge that made his private strength greater than the humiliation forced upon him. True identity revealed is a moment that changes everything. It is the instant when the mask of assumption falls away, when the truth of a person's worth and position can no longer be hidden by prejudice, ignorance, or shallow judgment. For so long, people may look at someone and see only what they expect to see. They judge by skin color, by clothing, by accent, by the surface details that are easiest to label. Yet when the true identity of that person emerges, it forces everyone who misjudged them to confront their own blindness. The contrast between what they assumed and what is revealed is often so stark that it shakes their understanding of the situation entirely. On the flight, the man who had been forced out of his VIP seat carried this secret power with calm restraint. The airline staff and passengers believed they were dealing with an ordinary traveler, someone who had no authority to challenge their decision. In their minds, he was a passenger who could be dismissed, a man with no influence beyond his ticket. But the reality was so much greater than what they imagined. This man was the airline's biggest investor, the one whose resources, decisions, and vision held more weight than any of the staff or passengers combined. His true identity was not just that of a traveler, it was that of a powerful figure who had given life and strength to the very company that was now dishonoring him. The revelation of true identity often comes with silence before the storm. Those who judged him so quickly had no idea they were pushing down someone who stood far above them in authority. They believed they had exercised control, but in truth, they had only exposed their own prejudice. When the truth of who he was emerged, every assumption unraveled. The staff who had spoken with superiority were suddenly reduced to embarrassment. The passengers who watched in silence were forced to question the ease with which they accepted the injustice. The man's true identity did not just correct the mistake, it illuminated the failure of everyone who had judged him by appearance alone. The most striking part of such a revelation is the reversal of power it creates. In one moment, the man was seen as powerless, a victim of discrimination. In the next, he was understood to be the most powerful individual connected to that very airline. That shift did not change who he was, he had always been that powerful investor. What changed was the perception of those around him. True identity does not transform the person, it transforms the understanding of those who never cared to see clearly in the first place. This is why revelations carry such force, they reveal not just the truth of the person, but the blindness of the world around them. For the man, revealing his true identity was not about pride. It was about justice. Humility had allowed him to remain calm when humiliated. Strength had allowed him to endure the injustice without anger. But identity was the final tool, the undeniable truth that no one could argue against. By revealing who he really was, he held up a mirror to everyone who had misjudged him and forced them to face the cost of their prejudice. His revelation was not loud, not boastful, it was a simple fact that carried weight beyond any words. And in that moment, every attempt to diminish him collapsed under the weight of truth. True identity has the power to silence a room. Those who had spoken with authority suddenly fall quiet, their voices stripped of confidence. Those who believed themselves superior are forced to confront their mistake. Those who watched silently must wrestle with their own inaction. The revelation does not just correct the surface event, it exposes the hidden realities of power, respect, and human worth. It makes clear that appearances are often the weakest foundation on which to judge another person. There is also a lesson in the timing of revealing identity. The man could have spoken earlier. He could have stopped the humiliation at the very first moment by declaring who he was. Yet he chose patience. He allowed the injustice to unfold, not because he was powerless, but because he knew the impact of revelation is greatest when the assumptions of others are fully exposed. If he had spoken too soon, they might have simply corrected their mistake and moved on. But by waiting, by allowing them to show their prejudice in front of everyone, he ensured that the moment of revelation would carry its full weight. When the truth finally came out, it was not just about his seat. It was about dignity, respect, and justice. The revelation showed that the man who was treated as less deserving was in fact the one who had made the airline itself possible. The same system that tried to strip him of worth was built on his contributions. His identity revealed was not just a personal triumph, it was a public reckoning, a shift in perception so sharp that it forced everyone present to see beyond their shallow judgments. Justice without anger is one of the most profound demonstrations of strength a person can display. When wronged, the instinctive response is often rage, a desire to strike back, to make the offender feel the weight of the pain they caused. Yet there is another way, a path chosen not by those who are weak, but by those whose sense of dignity is so deeply rooted that they refuse to let anger dictate their actions. Justice delivered without anger carries a power that anger cannot match. It is calm, undeniable, and unforgettable. It is the kind of justice that not only corrects a wrong but leaves a lasting lesson on those who committed it. On the flight, when the black man was forced out of his VIP seat, the humiliation was clear and public. Every passenger could see the injustice, even if they chose silence. Many in his position might have exploded with fury, demanding recognition, demanding respect, demanding that the staff acknowledge their mistake. His anger would have been justified. The prejudice was plain, the treatment unfair. Yet instead of letting rage become his voice, he chose patience. He chose to hold on to his strength quietly, waiting for the right moment to let the truth speak louder than his emotions. His justice would not be clouded by fury. It would be sharp, clean, and undeniable. Anger has a way of overshadowing justice. When a person reacts with rage, the focus often shifts from the wrong committed to the outburst itself. People stop talking about the injustice and start talking about the anger. The airline staff could have dismissed his fury as aggression. Passengers could have shifted their attention from the discrimination to the tone of his reaction. But by choosing to remain calm, by refusing to let anger dictate his actions, the man made sure the injustice remained at the center of the story. No one could twist his behavior to excuse what had been done to him. His calm made the truth impossible to ignore. Justice without anger is also a mark of self-control. It shows that a person is not ruled by the behavior of others but by their own principles. The man's restraint revealed a discipline that few possess. He did not allow the humiliation to drag him into shouting or arguments. Instead, he held steady, knowing that the weight of his identity, once revealed, would speak more powerfully than any words of rage ever could. His calmness was not weakness. It was mastery, the kind of mastery that comes from knowing you are in control even when others believe they have taken power from you. When his true identity came to light, it carried more weight precisely because he had not been angry. His revelation of being the airline's biggest investor landed with quiet force. It stripped away the dignity of those who wronged him without him ever having to raise his voice. Their shame became their punishment, their realization of how they had acted became the justice. His calmness magnified the impact of the truth, turning what could have been a heated confrontation into a lesson none could forget. There is a dignity that comes with choosing justice without anger. It elevates the one wronged above the actions of those who caused harm. It shows that while they acted from prejudice, ignorance, or arrogance, he acted from a place of principle and inner strength. He did not need to match their behavior with hostility. He rose above it, letting the truth itself deliver the blow. This dignity is what made his justice unforgettable. It did not come with shouting, but with silence. It did not come with rage, but with revelation. The passengers who witnessed the event saw more than just the revelation of his identity. They saw the contrast between his composure and the arrogance of those who humiliated him. That contrast burned the lesson deeper than anger ever could. If he had raged, they might have dismissed him as emotional. Instead, they saw a man wronged, a man powerful, a man dignified, who chose not to let prejudice drag him into fury. That choice made the injustice undeniable, the reversal of perception complete. Justice without anger also leaves no escape for the guilty. Anger gives them excuses. They can say the victim overreacted, they can focus on the tone instead of the truth. But calm justice leaves them cornered with their own actions. The airline staff could not claim misunderstanding when the truth was revealed. They could not dismiss his behavior as excessive. They were forced to face their prejudice without distraction. His refusal to meet injustice with rage gave them no place to hide. The man's choice to remain calm also gave strength to those who witnessed the event. It showed them that there is another way to fight injustice, not through shouting or violence, but through composure, patience, and the undeniable power of truth. It demonstrated that justice, when delivered without anger, carries a purity that pierces through excuses and defenses. His example became a lesson not only for those who wronged him but for all who watched, teaching them that the calmest voice can sometimes speak the loudest. A lesson for all on respect begins in the recognition that respect is not a privilege to be handed out selectively but a basic human right that belongs to every person, regardless of appearance, status, or background. Too often, respect is treated as something conditional, something earned only if a person fits into preconceived notions of worthiness. This mindset is what allows discrimination to take root so openly. When respect is withheld because of bias, it reveals not the flaws of the one disrespected, but the failings of those who judge. The story of the black man forced out of his VIP seat is not only about one individual's humiliation or one company's mistake, it is a mirror reflecting a larger truth, that respect must be unconditional if justice and dignity are to exist in society. On that flight, respect was denied to a man who had earned it 1,000 times over. His ticket had placed him in that VIP seat, his investments had strengthened the airline, his presence demanded acknowledgement. Yet all of that was ignored. Instead, the staff looked at him and decided he was undeserving. They acted as though his very existence in that space was an error that needed correction. This is the danger of conditional respect. It assumes that worth is visible on the surface, that one can measure it by skin color, by wealth displayed, or by social cues. But true respect is blind to these things. It is rooted in the understanding that every person, regardless of who they are, deserves to be treated with dignity. The lesson is clear: when respect is withheld, injustice thrives. Those staff members believed they were simply following procedure or protecting the comfort of another passenger. But in reality, they were participating in a deeper injustice, one that echoes centuries of people being told where they could or could not sit, who could or could not belong, who was considered worthy or unworthy. Their actions carried the weight of history, even if they did not realize it. And in that moment, they failed not only the man they humiliated but themselves, because they exposed their inability to treat another human being with the basic respect he deserved. Respect has the power to prevent humiliation before it begins. Had the staff looked at the man with fairness, had they treated him as they would treat any other passenger, the entire conflict would have been avoided. This is what makes the lesson so urgent: respect costs nothing, yet its absence creates consequences that cannot be undone. The humiliation, the prejudice, the reversal of power when his identity was revealed, all of it stemmed from the failure to extend respect from the very beginning. A simple recognition of his dignity could have changed everything. For the passengers watching, the incident also carried a lesson. Their silence was a form of complicity, a quiet acceptance of what they knew was wrong. Respect is not only something individuals deserve from authority figures, it is something they deserve from each other. To watch injustice and say nothing is to deny respect as surely as committing the act itself. Each silent gaze, each averted eye, became part of the man's humiliation. The lesson for them was that respect must sometimes take the form of courage, the willingness to speak when others remain silent, the resolve to protect the dignity of someone else even when it is not convenient. When the truth of the man's identity was revealed, the staff and passengers were forced to confront the cost of their lack of respect. Suddenly, they realized they had humiliated not just an ordinary passenger but the airline's biggest investor, the very person whose support gave them jobs, salaries, and opportunities. This revelation turned their assumptions upside down. But the deeper lesson was not about wealth or power, it was about respect itself. If they had treated him with dignity from the start, they would not have needed to be corrected by his status. Respect should not depend on discovering who someone is. It should exist regardless of identity, because every human being is worthy of it. The most powerful lessons are the ones that expose universal truths. This moment on the flight was not just about one man or one airline. It was about society's failure to consistently apply respect across lines of race, class, and status. Too often, respect is given upward, to those perceived as powerful, while those who appear powerless are disregarded. Yet true respect flows equally to all. It does not shift with wealth, it does not bend to prejudice, it does not wait for proof of worthiness. It exists because humanity itself demands it. The man's experience became a lesson not through his words but through the contrast between how he was treated and who he truly was. His calmness, his strength, his eventual revelation, all of these served to highlight the glaring absence of respect that started it all. Those who wronged him could not escape the truth that their actions had been rooted in disrespect, and those who watched could not deny the lesson unfolding before their eyes. Respect is the foundation of justice, the measure of humanity, and the one thing that, when denied, turns ordinary moments into unforgettable lessons.